Well, thank you very much. I have been very fortunate to look after the town hall clock for coming on for 25 years, and it's one of the best clocks we've ever had the privilege of working on. So I hope to kind of get that across today in this little talk I'm going to give. A picture of Town Hall, just so you can remember what it did look like before the scaffolding went up. I mean, I remember the first time I came to Manchester as a clockmaker to look at this clock, and coming into Albert Square and seeing this magnificent tower and its clock dials was awe-inspiring. It really was something which kind of stuck in my memory. That was even before I got on into the inside of the building. And we are fortunate that we do work on a lot of cathedrals throughout the country, but I got the impression that this building was a cathedral to the Victorian Industrial Revolution of Manchester. It really does have that feel about it. So I was knocked over and bowled over it before I even got to see the clock mechanism. I'm going to start off with a few facts about the town hall, which I'm sure many of you know. It was designed by Alfred Waterhouse and took 9 years to build, and was opened on the 13th of September 1877. It is, I've been told, 281 feet 6 inches or 85.5 metres to the top of the tower, making it the third largest clock tower in the country, after Old Joe at Birmingham University, which stands at 100 metres, and the Elizabeth Tower at Big Ben, as we know, is 97 metres. So it is a big, big clock tower. The next slide, I love this one. This is taken in 2007, about 16 years ago, when we had to remove the hands, because there's a set of rollers which are behind the hands which support them, and the metal plate holding them had corroded, and the hands had started to slump, and the clock stopped. But what I do like about this picture is that it actually starts to give you an impression of the size of these magnificent dials. I mean, they are 16 feet or 4.9 meters in diameter, and they're made from cast iron and glazed with opal glass. The distance, just again, I love these little facts, the distance between the minute digits is 9.5 inches or 25 centimeters. And one thing you will notice, that there are no hours, there's no numerals on the dials. In fact, the hours are marked by fleur-de-lis, with the suns marking the quarters. And over on the drawing there, you'll see that the suns are an addition. And I wonder if that's just to kind of make that 9, 12, 6 and 3 stand out a little bit more. Incised around the stonework of each dial, of the 3 forward-facing dials, are the following words. On the north dial, teach us. On the west, to number. And finally, on the south, our days, which says, teach us to number our days, which not everybody picks up onto. This is another one of my favourite photographs from behind the dial. Again, I show it to kind of give you an idea of the size, but you also start to see more of the construction of the dial with its 108 panels of opal glass, all held in the cast iron frame with putty. Now, for the people who came in this morning or during the today, you'll notice that we've got a set of hands on display at the main entrance. I really do kind of want to encourage you, if you've got the opportunity, to have your photograph taken in front of them. And if you've got children or grandchildren, please take them along and get that photograph. I do a lot of research into different clock towers around the country, and it's amazing how you find photographs from 50 or 100 years ago of people standing next to hands. And it's amazing how many, if you've got a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, in 30 years' time, they're going to be looking at the dials with that memory, that connection between the hands and the clock dial. So take that opportunity. It doesn't happen very often, and I think it's one you'll regret if you miss it. The minute hand is 9 feet long, or 2.7 metres, and weighs around 76 kilos. The hour hand is 6 foot, or 1.8 metres, and they're both made from copper. They're not as heavy as they look, actually. They're incredibly well balanced, because without a well balanced hand, your clock is going to keep time. So what we'll do next is take a step up the towers. Now, this is really, really one of my favourite towers because it has a lift. I've spent my life going up and down spiral staircases. So to be able to get up the first 6 floors using a lift is great. You get to that position, you have to go up the spiral staircases, and the first place you get to is to the ringing room. Now, the bells used to be rung from the room below at level 6, but for some unknown reason, they moved the ropes up to this level. Now, I don't know if there's any bell ringers here. It might be because there's such a long draft of the ropes made the bells hard to ring, or that they wanted to use the room below. But they're now rung from this position. There are 12 ringable bells, which is quite unusual for a town hall to have a set of bells which can be rung as in churches. We get 12 peals of 12 in churches, but I think this might be the only one in the country in a building like this. You'll notice over in the left-hand side of the picture a case, and in that case is the first part of the clock mechanism that we come across, and it's the pendulum bob. Now, this isn't your standard pendulum assembly. It is 15 feet in length. The pendulum bob itself weighs 150 kilos. It's quite a massive thing. And it beats 2 seconds. So the swing is a 2-second period. It's a very interestingly made, it's a compensated pendulum. It's designed so it compensates for the change in temperature. And this is done by a small, thinner rod which runs the length of the pendulum, and at the bottom of that it terminates, and a zinc tube springs off the bottom, and then hung from the top of that zinc tube is the outer pipe with that massive pendulum bob on. And the idea is, as the rod expands, the thinner rod expands down, the zinc rod expands up, and the pendulum bob stays in its same position. And this helps the clock to keep accurate time, which we'll discuss again. So once we move on from there, and you can see in that picture the rating nut, like you have on any pendulum on a grandfather clock or a mantle clock. That rating nut you turn, you shorten the pendulum, it goes faster, you lengthen it, and it goes slower. So we go back up the spiral staircase, we keep on going up, and the next room we come to is the clock room. And this is, again, I always talk about my experience of first coming up the tower. I've seen a lot of clocks. I've not done anything else in my life, but to come along and see this room with its beautifully panelled glass case, and the history, you can feel the history in there. It's hardly changed from when it was first installed. And inside the clock case is this wonderful mechanism. This clock was installed in 1877 and was started on New Year's Day of 1878. The clock movement is made by Gillett and Bland and Company of Croydon, London. It is a flatbed turret clock, which made it easy to work on. All the wheels are removable. It is, on the left-hand side, you have your hour striking train. In the middle, we have what we call the going train, the kind of ticking part of it, which is, again, very unique, and we will talk about in more detail. And on the right, we have the quarter train, which plays the famous Westminster quarters. But before I go into any more detail about it, I will kind of mention a little bit of the history of the firm which made it. The company was founded by this chap, a chap called William Gillett. He was born in Hadlow in Kent, and in 1837 he moved to Clerkenwell in London, which was then the kind of centre of horology and clockmaking within the country. He moved his business in 1844 to Croydon, where it stayed all the time up until 1957. And it was here that this clock was made. Now, in 1854, he was joined by Charles Bland, hence the name Gillett and Bland, who was really a financer and kind of brought the money into the business to allow it to expand. And they were able to perhaps build the biggest manufactory the country had ever seen for turret clocks. And you can see this is a copy of the original tender and specification for the clock, but it also illustrates the workshops that they had. And these were quite remarkable. I mean, they'd bring all the raw materials in at one end, and clocks of all shapes and sizes would disappear out the other. They would make not just turret clocks, they'd make domestic clocks, from long case clocks to mantle clocks to regulator clocks. They would make carillons, which played tunes, and they also had a bell foundry, which they cast all their own bells, and their bells are regarded as some of the best bells you could buy. They had the state-of-the-art technology. It was known as the steam clock factory because they had one of those modern steam engines to power all the machinery within that building. They even had a machine which is this massive cone made of magnets. So when all the sweepings of the materials which were being used on the milling machines and lathes were put into a bucket, they could put this magnet in, turn it round and round, remove all the steel, and then use the brass in their foundry to kind of start casting more parts for clocks. It must have been a remarkable place. So, okay, I've gone a bit off piece there, so I just need to catch up with myself here. I also found a report in the Croydon Advertiser dated October the 11th, 1879, when the clock had already been installed. And they're talking about some of the finest clocks that Gillett and Bland had ever made. And it says, this is a quoting from the Croydon Advertiser, "First on the list stands the great clock and carillon of Manchester Town Hall, the largest ever constructed with the exception of Big Ben, while they possesses more of a recent scientific improvements than even the Westminster clock can lay claim to." And we'll have a chat about that. They go on to say, to give you an idea of the exactitude which this has gained in timekeeping, I may mention that the clock itself does not lose more than 2 seconds a week. And in fact, it is better than that. It can keep within 2 seconds a month. It is a most remarkable machine. It is a precision instrument for all its size. The total cost of the work was £9,000. The scientific improvements they were discussing is the escapement, that ticking part of the clock, the part that impulses the pendulum and keeps it to time. The escapement was painted on the 2nd of January 1877 by William Gillett and Charles Bland, and the Manchester Town Hall clock was the very first to employ this escapement. The other clocks which they supplied with this escapement were some of the best clock towers you could have built during the Victorian period. There were Birmingham City Hall, right in the middle of Birmingham, the Royal Courts of Justice in central London, Hampton Court Palace, with a clock. There was the first clock movement at Hampton Court Palace, which was capable of driving the astronomical dial accurately, Toronto Town Hall, and also St James's Palace, London. So I'm not going to go into too much technical detail regarding this escapement. It's called a gravity escapement with a remontoire. The gravity escapement is actually called Lord Grimthorpe's double three-legged gravity escapement. I will test you on that later. It was first employed at the Great Clock of Westminster, and that's where Lord Grimthorpe designed it for that clock. It revolutionised public timekeeping because it allowed these massive dials to keep accurate time. And then Gillett and Bland took it one step further by adding a remontoire. And a remontoire is an independent force being applied to the escapement. And this can be a spring or weights. And these are the weights on the Manchester Town Hall. And these are the weights which power the escapement, which impulses the pendulum. So it means whatever effect the wind is having on the dials or birds landing on the hands, it will not affect the force going into the pendulum, and therefore the pendulum will keep better time. Again, I strongly advise when they open up the tower again and they let people back up there, if you can go and watch this thing working, it is hypnotic. It is a beautiful thing to watch. It sounds wonderful, and it sits there just ticking away and working. And it is one of the best escapements you'll ever have the opportunity to see. And after 140 odd years work, it's still doing exactly the same as it was designed to do. This is the quarter train. The quarters were originally from St Mary's, Cambridge, dating from 1796. But Lord Grimthorpe again, he'd gone to Trinity College, Cambridge, heard these chimes, and he altered them to suit the Westminster clock, which became world famous. So after that, any public building would have the Westminster chimes, and that's why here at Manchester we have these Westminster chimes. There's 5 hammers for 4 notes, mainly because the larger hammer on the bottom note has to play quickly in succession, and so they use 2 hammers to do that. So another thing which makes this clock really, really unique is this little thing here. The lifts within this building were originally driven by the hydraulic pressure of water pumped from the River Irwell from a pumping station. And this was unique, modern technology. And they decided to use that power to wind the clock. So this is the first example of any automatic winding system being fitted to a clock anywhere in the country. This pump, you'd fit a belt onto this pump. It would go up onto this lay shaft, which runs across the top of the clock room. And that wheel you see at the end is directly above the clock case, where there's a slot. You could then, with this wheel here, the one at the back, you then take that wheel and you'd put it onto the winding square of one of the trains. Now we have this great picture here. I do like his sideburns. And you can see that wheel is mounted on the left-hand side on the striking train, ready for winding. We still have the belts up in the tower, which would connect this up to that wheel above the clock case. You'd then engage the pump, and that weight would be wound up. When it was at the height, you'd take that wheel off, put it onto the going train. You would then change the belt and bring it back up and do the same thing to the 3 trains. So this is the very first clock this was any form of automatic winding system was applied to. This picture is from 1916, and I think it's the first time it was connected, so I've been told, to the Greenwich time signal, and we'll have a little look at that. They have a little galvanometer. You can see it just above the dial that he's working on there. When the hydraulic lifts were removed from the tower, they decided that they'd fit electric automatic winding. And these are the 3 motors which replaced that system that we discussed, made by Charles Potts of Leeds, who were part of Gillett and Johnson then. Gillett and Bland had finished, they turned to Gillett and Johnson. This photograph, I'm pretty sure, is from the 1950s, and it's when the automatic winding units were fitted right out at the front, I think just to prove that they did work, because it was a big ask to start to raise these weights. I mean, just to give you an idea of the size of the weights that the hydraulic system and this electric system had to wind. The going train weight was 9.3 hundredweight, or 472 kilos. The quarter weight was 21.7 hundredweight, which is 1,100 kilos, and the striking train was 22 hundredweight and 1,120 kilos. If you had to wind those by hand, you would know about it. Big Ben, they used to have 2 men winding the weights 3 times a week, and it took them 4 hours each day to do that job. And to wind them, they had to turn the handle 7,500 times. So to just give you an idea how much energy that employed, and why fitting that hydraulic pump was obviously top of their list. Not only so, this photograph here shows a micro switch working from the clock, and that actually controlled the slave system throughout the Manchester Town Hall, I'm given to understand. This clock was so accurate, they didn't need a master clock like we do in other buildings. They were using the turret clock to do it. But also, just to the right, you can see the dial of the galvanometer. And these were fitted, Big Ben had them, a lot of the important clocks throughout the country had galvanometers fitted, which gave you a signal from Greenwich so you could regulate your clock perfectly. And so again, Manchester was keeping perfect time. The other part of the installation was the Carillon. Now, this is a slide of the original of a Gilliton band Carillon. It's called a trigger release Carillon. And just before I move on, it is reported that the weight needed to drive this machine was 3 tons. So you can imagine again why they had to have some form of automatic winding unit. We also read in that Croydon Advertiser, I find out a nice little bit of information about this. The Carillon machine, and I'm quoting from it, the Carillon machine of Manchester clock plays 35 tunes on 21 bells. In addition, there is another barrel for ringing changes automatically, similar to that of a ringing appeal, without the manual labour of having to be employed. So they're kind of getting rid of the bell ringers, I think. The Carillon was triggered 4 times a day at 9, 12, 3 and 6. Now sadly, this wonderful machine is no longer about. We don't know where it was. It was one of the biggest they've ever made. The one at Worcester Cathedral, which is the largest one I know that's left, played 21 tunes. This played 35 tunes. So it's a shame it's gone missing. It was removed in 1937 with this equally unique pianola tune play machine. So there are people who know about the pianolas, where they have these vacuum chests pumping away with bellows, which pulled down onto levers, which then lifted the hammers or pulled the hammers back to strike the bells. This is the only working example of one of those left in the country. There is another one which isn't working. This is operated with the paper rolls, and up in the town hall, up in the clock room, they had quite a number of these with various different tunes for different times of the year. This is all being taken out, and it is in our workshops at the moment, and I will discuss that because that's a lovely little project on its own. And it is a rare beast, and I think it's great that we have an example of it there. So we go back up the stairs, and these stairs, the next room you come across is the bell chamber. Now, this is a very hard place to photograph. Originally, there were 20 bells in the belfry, and at the top, under the spire, is Great Abel. They were cast by John Taylors of Loughborough in 1877. However, in 1937, they were taken away to be recast for the coronation of Edward VIII. Now, and then at the same time, they were going to add another 2 bells, making a total of 23, which gives you two full octaves, which gives you a lot of scope for playing different tunes. However, there was one slight problem. During the recasting, King Edward abdicated. Now, to recast the set of bells would have been very, very expensive. So, as you can see here, they decided to get rid of the Edward, knock 2 off the 8, and engrave it in. This is a great photograph from Andy. I do love it. It's a little bit of social history. I mean, I can imagine the kind of the people of the committee going, "Oh no, he's abdicated." So it's just, what do you do? Oh, we'll just cut it off. So anyway, I do love that. So we then leave the belfry and head up these spiral stairs again until we come into the room behind the dials. Now, at this stage, we're quite a long way from the clock movement, and there's a connecting rod which goes from where the clock mechanism was. It drives up to a set of bevels, it drives across to the middle underneath the bell frame, and then goes right up the tower to the top to this set of bevels, which then divide off into 4 directions. These are big, they're kind of 16 inches in diameter. The rule of thumb by Gillets was 1 inch of bevel for every 1 foot of dial to help with the kind of leverage. These drive out to what we call the dial motion works. These are a set of gears which give you the 12-to-1 reduction between the hour and minute hand. And so you have 4 of those, again, behind these most magnificent dials. These dials were originally illuminated by gas lighting, and I happened to notice, reading in one of the books there, it's described how they have automatic gas lighting coming from the clock, and it would have been one of the first to kind of start to employ that automatic gas lighting. This was obviously replaced at some stage with electric lighting, and I understand the plan is that they're going to have a new set of LED lights which are kind of going to be much more versatile for illuminating the dial. So, and then move up another set of stairs, and we come to the top underneath the spire where we have Great Abel. This was named after Abel Haywood, chairman of the building committee and Lord Mayor of Manchester when the town hall was built. However, like Big Ben, the bell at Westminster, after 5 years of use, the bell cracked. And this must have been as big a pain as you could wish for, because you'd have to get it all out again. So originally the bell weighed 6 tons 900 weight, or 6,550 odd kilos. When tailors recast it to the same dimensions, it came back weighing 8 tons 200 weight. That's 8,230 kilos, so a lot bigger. Well, it was the same dimensions, but it must have been a lot thicker to give it a lot more strength. Now, to get this bell out, you have to get it all the way out the town. If you go into the main entrance of the town hall and look up, you will see this. And this is a decorative panel of the trapdoor, which goes all the way to the top to where Great Abel is situated. But if you can imagine, 5 years after the clock had been installed, they were going to have to get rid of anything going up that way, the bells, the dial motion works, the bevel gears, everything would have had to come out for the bell to be lowered down, recast, and then pulled back up into the tower. There must be some documented evidence about that somewhere. It must be in the minutes of the committee somewhere. It would be very interesting to see what whose responsibility the cracking of the bell was, whether it would be Gillets were putting a too heavy a hammer on it, or did tailors not cast the bell correctly to the right specification. I'm sure they would have found somebody to blame anyway. So, you also, when you're up by the bell, up in the spire, you get this most magnificent view up the spire, and you kind of get an impression of the mass and the size of it. So you can see Great Abel there, just to kind of give you some idea of scale. So what have we been doing? Well, we've been dismantling the clock movement, and we have another example of ancient Manchester there called Andrew Hames, who helped us with the dismantling of the clock. The clock is, pretty big. It's 14 feet long. Big Ben's 15.5 feet long, and it's 3.5 feet wide, 1.5 meters in diameter. So everything had to be dismantled because, like this, the building is going to be like a building site. It was a building site, and this is a precision instrument. You can't leave it up there while all that work is going on. You wouldn't expect to take the back off your wristwatch, put it on the kitchen table, and decorate your kitchen. And even though this thing does weigh, I would say, 4 tons, you have to treat it with the same respect. So the clock was dismantled and then lowered down to the level 6. And these are a few of those hatches opened up so that we could start to lower everything down. And this is the pendulum bob on its way down the tower to level 6. Once we got it there, everything was wrapped up and prepared, ready to start to be moved out of the work of the window and into ready to come down the scaffolding. The one thing we did leave on site are the dials, and we're in the process of just about to start the kind of restoration, conservation work on these dials. But one thing I think you've got to realise is that these dials have been up on the tower for 140 odd years, and even though they look a little bit pale, they are still in remarkably good condition. Even some of the panes of the glass will be original. We've had paint samples taken, so we understand the colour schemes of the dial. We've done just testing different methods of preparation for the cast iron and leaving some of the original paintwork there. And we've got a meeting on Thursday just to kind of move that forward. So when the scaffold does come down, these dials will be fully restored and ready with a modern paint system, ready to kind of do another 120 odd years work. So the clock mechanism was then packed up and brought to our workshops up in Cumbria. We have a pretty comprehensive workshop. We have 5,500 square feet of conservation workshops up in Cumbria. We employ 22 people. We work nationally, worldwide actually, but this is where we do all the conservation works. We don't subcontract any of it. All of it is in-house. And we're also in a very fortunate position to have a very good team of young horologists, conservators working for us. And it's here that we've done all the work. From cleaning processes that we've used, on the left, it's just a general degreaser. We use kind of a citrus-based cleaner, trying to kind of reduce the use of kind of the environmentally unfriendly cleaners. On the top right, we use a system called aquablasting, which is pressurized water with little glass beads in them, which kind of buffet and clean everything very gently, trying to leave as much of the original finish on the parts as we can, and without taking any original material away. And on the bottom is another method that we use called ice blasting. And this is using dry ice fired at high pressure onto areas where the grease is heavily contaminated, and it causes little thermal shocks, which then gets rid of it, again leaving bits of the material, original material there. We then, once everything is cleaned, we can start to undertake some of the repair work. And even though the clock has been operating all that time, there is not a huge amount of repair work to do, but there are parts which did need attention. On the dial motion works that we spoke about, there's a wonderful little roller section at the end of the pipes, and I don't think have ever been removed and cleaned and properly seen to for 140 years. So again, it's an opportunity for us to do that. Some of the bearings needed attention. It's all those little things because it's slow moving but incredibly well engineered. This is Elliot doing some repair works to the hammer. This is the hammer which strikes Great Abel. Where it had been operating on the springs, it had worn itself away. We've rebuilt all of that. We've rebuilt the springs, we've rebushed it and repainted it, and now that's ready to come back and start operating again and be a bit more lively as it strikes the hammer and the bell and hopefully ring out a little bit more. Then everything that's been repaired, we now have in storage, all cleaned, ready to come back to Manchester Town Hall. The tune playing machine that I mentioned earlier is undergoing a large conservation project at the moment. It's a very clever machine, and as I've said, perhaps the only working example left in the country, and it runs off its paper rolls. What we're also doing is combining a little tablet. So the wires will now go up to a set of solenoids which operate the hammers, but that means that we can operate those solenoids in a different way, not just by using this machine, but by using the tablet, which allows people to compose music for perhaps the country's heaviest musical instrument. I mean, we're talking about bells, 22 bells, which people could write for, school children could write for, universities could write for, and we could come up with some modern bell music, not kind of the Victorian top 20. And I think that's a really exciting part about this project. You talk about heavy metal, well, we've got heavy metal. We're just about this week. It's going to be tested with its switches, and it's not far off being completed and ready to come back to the town, to the city, and hopefully, they'll be able to set these competitions and get people writing for something which has never, people have never written for 22 bells for a long time, I don't think. I'm going to finish up with this photograph. And this is young Rowan. Young Rowan came to me as a 17-year-old and he wanted to be a clockmaker. And he's been with us 3 years and is becoming a very good clockmaker. Slowly he's growing in confidence and he's being taught how to go about it. We look at clocks like Manchester Town Hall. I mean, it's massively over-engineered. Manchester Town Hall can last 1,000 years. It won't wear out. The reason it will is because we'll lose the skills to look after it. And so what we've got to do is to make sure we get lots of Rowans. We've got to encourage young people that there is a career in heritage craft. You can go out and learn a skill which is beneficial to everybody. It also gives you that feeling of actually being able to produce something with your hands, something to be proud of, something to be part of the history of. And I'm very keen that we make sure that there are opportunities to do this, not just in clockmaking, but also in stonemasonry, gilding, stained glass windows. There's loads of heritage crafts out there which are being used here at Manchester. So Manchester Town Hall is not just a clock tower, in my opinion. It's an 87-metre high beacon for heritage craft skills. And that's what we should be doing. And we should concentrate on making sure we have Rowans. And we got, when we brought the hands, we got a young lady called Rosie who's working for us, and she's as keen as Rowan. Not just educating them, but we have to educate the general public, you lot, to kind of realise the benefit of these people. We all go and have our car serviced and pay 70, 80 quid an hour for somebody to replace a part. I mentor young clockmakers, and one of the things they come to me and they say, well, if somebody wants their clock repaired and I'm doing it for £20 an hour and they're complaining, you've got to realise the value of these skills that we want. So if we want young Rowans, you've got to pay for it. And that's what we have to make sure, not just educate them, but educate the rest of the people as well. So it is a great honour to be working on this project, and I think it's going to be great when we bring it all back together, get the hands and everything, the dials back on, get the clock movement back in, get those sounds coming out the tower, and make sure people feel the benefit of all these skills which have gone in to our town hall. Thank you very much indeed.